What's up, Dirt Junkies? I just got back from almost 40 miles in the high Uintas with my friend Justin on an awesome backpacking trip. Along the way, I had some gear that excelled, some gear that failed, so I want to share with you both of those, and then stick around to the end for a few tips from the trip. Let's get into it. Because I'm in a good mood today, let's start with the gear that excelled. My very favorite piece of gear from the entire trip is this tiny cork ball. Let me tell you why. This thing is amazing for massaging your feet and legs either during or after a long day of hiking. My feet always get a little bit fatigued, especially backpacking with that heavy load on my back, and they're always still tired the next morning when I wake up. But this is the first trip where I took this little cork ball along. I gave my feet a nice massage sometimes halfway through my hike, and then every night during the trip, and my feet and legs felt 100% better for having done that. This is a really small investment that made a really big difference on my trip. I think you can pick these up for about $12 on Amazon, and it was well worth that. It's small, light, easily fit into my first aid kit, and then I had it with me every step of the way, so whenever my feet or legs were feeling tired, I could pull this out, give them a quick massage, loosen things up, and be on my way. I definitely recommend this cork ball on your next backpacking trip. You might think it sounds weird, but it actually feels amazing. I was a skeptic, and now I'm a believer. Team cork ball. The next piece of gear I want to talk about is this tiny BRS backpacking stove. The bag probably doesn't even look big enough to hold a backpacking stove. This thing is super light at about 25 grams and worked amazingly. Admittedly, all I typically do in the backcountry is boil water for mountain house meals, oatmeal, something like that, but this thing worked great and is so small and light. It's a fantastic piece of gear and super budget friendly at only about $12. Let me show you just how small it is in this bag. So there's the stove all set up. That's all it is. Again, 25 grams, super light. I haven't done a full review on this. I want to test it out a little more first, but on this second trip with this stove, it worked amazingly. Small, light, effective, and budget friendly. And the next piece of gear that was a success I want to mention is hanging behind me, my Osprey Talon 44. Let me grab it. I've used this pack on several day trips, but I hadn't yet used it on an overnighter. This was my first overnighter with my Talon 44. I wasn't sure how it would handle the weight, but what I like about it and why I wanted to use it is that it is a lot lighter than my Osprey Ether 70 hanging behind me on this side. This comes in at just over 2 pounds, but can handle loads up to a little over 30 pounds, and it worked great. It was very comfortable with these padded straps, the nice wide hip belt, and there was plenty of room for all of my gear for 3 nights, 4 days in the backcountry. Super comfortable, light, and held everything that I needed for the entire trip. Loved this pack and the way that it excelled even on a 3-night, 4-day trip. Fantastic pack. If you want to see a full review of it, I'll put a link to that up here. All right, now let's talk about some gear that did not excel. First up is this headlamp. I've been on the hunt for a budget-friendly headlamp. I know there's some great brands out there that are really expensive and work fantastic, but I just can't bring myself to spend $50 to $100 on a headlamp. I would think with all the options out there, there has to be a nice budget-friendly headlamp that will work. Unfortunately, this was not it. I had to use it on our very first night because we got a little bit of a late start and it got dark before we got to our first destination. So I busted out the headlamp. It was nice and bright coming down the pass all the way until camp. I used it for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, but then when I tried to use it the following night, the battery was completely dead. Now, I know it was cold that night and that typically drains the batteries, but I actually slept with this thing in my sleeping bag all night, and when I checked it in the morning, it said that it still had 50 to 75% battery, but that night the battery was completely drained. I had a power bank, I tried to charge it, but the charging was taking forever, and I ended up just using my phone flashlight for the rest of the trip. I'll show you a screenshot of what this headlamp is on Amazon, but I am not going to include a link below because you should not buy this headlamp. If you have any good budget headlamp options, I would love to hear about them because, as I said, I am on the hunt for a nice, budget-friendly, but effective headlamp for night hiking and night trail running. Hit me with your recommendations because this was not it. The next piece of gear that failed, and I can't even show you because I've looked around the house and cannot find it. I was probably so frustrated with them that I just shoved them away and can't even remember where. but it was my gloves. The gloves I've used for trail running in the winter, hiking in the cold, are some soft mitten type gloves, but there was so much rain that those did not keep my hands warm. I know this isn't necessarily the gloves' fault because I should have had something more appropriate for the weather I was in, but what I realized is I need a better glove for backpacking trips where it's probably going to rain. Those gloves would be fine if it was just a day hike, something like that, but these gloves did not dry out almost the entire trip. It was raining, it was wet, and these gloves did me no favors in keeping my hands warm. My hands were warmer just taking the gloves off and trying to keep them inside of my rain jacket sleeves. So I definitely need to find some new gloves before my next backpacking trip. Next up, and this one really pains me to even say, I debated whether or not to even include it, but it is my Ultra Lone Peaks. I love these shoes. They are so comfortable. I love hiking in them. I love running in them. I love backpacking in them. But these ones have just not lasted. I had less than 200 miles in these at the end of that 40-mile trip, and look at them, they're totally beat up. A massive hole on that side, coming off right there. That piece broke along the trip, and they are just not even comfortable anymore. I can feel that the cushion is totally wiped out in these in less than 200 miles. I thought maybe it was the weight on the pack, and I wore these on another hike about a week later, and they still are not comfortable. And I hate to admit that because I love Ultras and I love the Lone Peaks, but I am just not satisfied with the durability here. So unfortunately, the Ultra Lone Peaks were a gear fail on that backpacking trip. Sorry, Ultra. All right, now on to a couple tips from the trip. This first one is something that I had tried a few times before, but I feel like I perfected it on this trip, and that is reusing the bags that your Mountain House or other freeze-dried meals come in. What I did was take one peak refuel meal, which was delicious by the way. I rinsed out the bag well and then saved the bag to cook my dinner the following night. And what I had for dinner the next night was one of these power rice blends from Knorr. This was delicious and so much cheaper than a freeze-dried meal. I think I paid $11 for my Peak Refuel Chili Mac. This was only $2 at my local grocery store. So I took one freeze-dried meal and then 2 of these and then just put it in my Peak Refuel bag with some boiling water for about 20 minutes. Next time I think I might leave it in there for 25 minutes. It was a little chewy, but still really delicious and way cheaper than taking 3 freeze-dried meals. It also really mixed up the flavor, and I feel like my stomach doesn't always do great on freeze-dried meals for days on end. So this was a delicious change up from the typical Mountain House Peak Refuel freeze-dried meals. Definitely a great tip to keep in mind. I did the same thing with my breakfast. Oop, that's not breakfast. I took one bag of Mountain House granola, had that on the first day, rinsed out the bag, and then saved it to cook my oatmeal in the following 2 days. Just some quick oats with some freeze-dried blueberries and some sugar, and it worked great. I didn't even have to seal the bag when I was making the oatmeal in here. I just put the ingredients in, dumped in the boiling water, and it was cooked in a minute and delicious. I'm pretty sure those oatmeal breakfasts cost me about $1 each, whereas this granola probably run you $6 or $7 on its own. A great way to save money and mix up your meals. So the first tip is take one freeze-dried meal, save the bag for your next meals, and cook them. You might want to try and make sure you get similar flavor profiles so you're not cooking your blueberry oatmeal in a beef stroganoff bag. That might be a little weird, but hey, if you like beef stroganoff blueberry oatmeal, go for it. Tip number 2 is lining your pack with a garbage bag. I know you can get some bags that are made specifically for this that are a lot more expensive. What I have found is that by using a black lawn bag, it will work just as well and be just as light. But the second part of this tip is make sure you get a slightly thicker bag. You'll see on these that this is a 2 mil thick bag. A lot of the cheap trash bags that you see are just 1 mil thick, and those will rip on you every time. It's happened to me a lot. So now I buy the 2 mil thick bags. As I've mentioned already, it rained a lot on this trip. It snowed the first night, so we were packing up a wet tent the very first morning, and then the following morning it rained a lot, dumped buckets and buckets. The tent was literally soaking through. It rained so much. So when I had to pack up the rain fly on the outside of my tent, I was really glad that my pack was lined with that 2 mil thick garbage bag, and all of the gear that I wanted to keep dry was inside it. I knew my sleeping bag, my sleeping pad, all of my clothes were nice and dry. It's a tiny amount of additional weight, but will save you a lot of grief in keeping all of your gear dry. I definitely recommend using a 2 mil thick trash bag to line your backpack to keep your gear dry on your next adventure. And for tip number 3, the last tip from this backpacking trip, take some separate clothes and socks for sleeping in at night if you think you're going to encounter rain or snow, or even if it's going to be hot. I know for me, I sweat a lot, which means after a day of hiking with a heavy pack on my back is really sweaty. Gross, yes, but what I don't want is those wet clothes to be inside my sleeping bag with me. It was really nice every night to be able to change out of my wet clothes either from sweat, rain, or snow and put on nice dry clothes to sleep in at night. It got pretty cold, and I know that if I had been sleeping in wet clothes, I would have been freezing. But nice dry clothes and socks kept me warm every night. So those are my 3 tips. I would love it if you would share some gear successes, gear fails, or tips from your most recent trail time down in the comments. So hit me up with those, and remember, life is better with some dirt in it. Excuse me. It's a negligible. I hate that word. Negligible. It's a negligible. Dang it.